This is America, and this is Chesapeake Coffee Roasters. It's one of tens of thousands of American businesses waiting for a tariff refund after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that Donald Trump's signature policy was illegal. I'll have more from here shortly, but first, it's over to Cyril Vanier in our Washington studio.
Heidi Jo Castro, thank you. Donald Trump likes to say, in fact, he loves to say, the tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language. You'll hear that several times during the show. But as a policy, tariffs have hit a wall. Most of the import duties imposed by the Trump administration over the past year have to be refunded, says the Supreme Court. There is a system in place for businesses to apply for refunds, businesses like the coffee roasters that Heidi visited. But that system misses a major part of the tariff reality: American consumers, the ones who ended up paying higher prices across the board.
I think tariffs are the most beautiful word. I think they're beautiful. It's going to make us rich. They cost Americans nothing. They made a great economy for us.
When tariffs are put into place, of course, what they do is they raise prices to some extent. To the extent those prices the tariffs are paid by consumers. We're waiting for that to go through the system so that goods inflation will return closer to what it's always been. I mean, it used to be, for many, many years, it was negative. And then, the year before tariffs came in, it was zero.
How big is this tariff refund bill? The number disclosed in court by the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol, $166 billion. That is how much the administration collected, claiming wide authority under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. And that's what has to be returned to American businesses. So far, the government has approved 87,000 claims for refunds worth around $35.5 billion. That's about 1/5 of the total expected refunds. Manuel Rapallo walks us through how we got here.
For years, tariffs were one of President Donald Trump's signature economic tools.
I always say tariffs is the most beautiful word to me in the dictionary.
The idea was simple: raise taxes on imported goods entering the United States, making foreign products more expensive and encouraging companies to buy and manufacture more goods in America. And now, after years of legal battles, many of those tariffs are being rolled back. So how did we get here? Well, on February 1st of last year, President Trump signed an executive order to impose tariffs on imports from Mexico, Canada, and China. Then on February 3rd, Trump stepped those back, agreeing to a 30-day pause on tariffs against Mexico and Canada, after both countries agreed to boost immigration enforcement efforts along the U.S. border. But a 10% tariff on all Chinese imports still came into effect the next day. By February 13th, the White House announced a plan for reciprocal tariffs for countries seeking to impose tariffs on the U.S.
And whatever they tariff us, other countries, we will tariff them. That's reciprocal, back and forth. Whatever they tax us, we will tax them.
By March 4th of last year, the U.S. hit Mexico and Canada with an additional 25% tariffs on imports and doubled Chinese import tariffs to 20%. All of this brings us to April 2nd, when President Trump announced a broad new global policy on import duties, a date that President Trump called Liberation Day.
April 2nd, 2025 will forever be remembered as the day American industry was reborn, the day America's destiny was reclaimed, and the day that we began to make America wealthy again. Going to make it wealthy, good and wealthy.
Following President Trump's announcement, U.S. stock markets had their worst day in half a decade. Investment banks warned prolonged tariffs could trigger a global recession. Facing market turmoil, the administration later paused parts of the policy for 90 days before reintroducing a modified version of the same tariffs. Now let's fast forward to February of this year, when the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Trump administration exceeded its authority when it expanded tariffs using emergency economic powers. But the ruling left one major question unanswered: what should happen to the billions of dollars already collected? Well, the U.S. federal government has begun issuing refunds to importers and businesses that paid those tariffs, but not directly to consumers. For their part, Trump administration officials have continued defending tariffs as a necessary tool to protect American industry, even after the Supreme Court ruling.
We will get back to the same tariff level for the countries. It will just be in a less direct and slightly more convoluted manner.
So despite the setback, the administration says it plans to continue pursuing tariffs, just under different legal authorities.
The federal officials estimate that about 330,000 importers are in line for refunds. The money will go to businesses which imported foreign goods, not, as we have said, to consumers. A few companies, however, are saying that they will pass the refund directly onto their customers. Here's Richard Gaisford.
The shipping and delivery companies FedEx, UPS and DHL have all said that for shipments where they acted as the importer of record, refunds will be given to consumers who originally bore those charges. The CEO of Costco told investors that if refunds are received, they will be returned to customers, but through lower prices. Basic Fun, the toy company behind brands like Tonka trucks and My Little Ponies, already received a refund of $400,000. That's just a fraction, though, of the $7.4 million it had paid in tariffs. The CEO there said that refunds will primarily be reinvested back into the business. Other companies like Nike, Target and Walmart could see refunds of between $1 and $10 billion. But they have yet to say whether customers will get any of that. Consumers aren't just waiting to see if the cash will be passed on to them. At least 17 class action lawsuits have been filed on behalf of them, seeking to recover the tariff-specific costs that they paid.
We're joined now by Harry Broadman, former U.S. Assistant Trade Representative and Chief of Staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. We're also joined by economist Alan Tonelson. Thank you very much to both of you for being with us. Harry Broadman, U.S. consumers, it seems, are really getting the short end of the stick here.
It should not be a surprise to anyone who understands trade policy that that is the case. And it shows the myth of Mr. Trump saying that, the foreigners will pay the tariffs. And that's just, now we're seeing the reality, and it's up to the companies, as we just heard in that clip, to refund what they're refunded back to the consumers. Boy, that's a Rube Goldberg kind of scheme about how to run an economy, I'll tell you.
Alan Tonelson, Donald Trump says and said multiple times that he was there to put money back into American consumers' pockets and reduce their taxes. The opposite is happening with this.
Well, the taxes have been reduced, certainly, and in fact, even more importantly, a big tax increase was avoided when the One Big Beautiful Bill was passed, which made the 2017 Trump tax cuts permanent. Had that not happened, American consumers would have lost a lot of money from their pockets. There's no doubt.
Tariffs are a tax.
I'm sorry?
And they paid, but tariffs are a form of tax, and they paid those.
It's very unclear how much that's actually been, and the reason is nobody really has a good handle except that the companies themselves as to how much tariff pass-through there was. There have been various guesses by economic research institutes and private economists of all kinds. They're guesses at very best. And one reason that it's been so difficult to understand and actually to calculate is because the tariff rates have changed so frequently throughout the second Trump administration, both because of unilateral U.S. moves for various reasons, the China rare earth problem that Mr. Trump ran into, but also because various trade deals, including framework trade deals, have resulted in tariff reductions of levies that had been previously imposed because those trade deals brought major benefits to the American economy and to American workers.
Are you saying that American consumers have not, over the past year, been paying higher prices, at least partly on account of the Trump tariffs?
I've seen some tariff effect from the various monthly inflation reports that have come out since. It's been very inconsistent. It's been pretty moderate. And in fact, as of the previous Consumer Price Index report from, I guess it was last week, it's very clear that I can point to 5 major industries that were heavily tariffed, where prices today for consumers are lower than they were during the peaks that they'd reached during the Biden administration. They're cheaper despite the tariffs. So it's very difficult to understand how these massive tariff inflation claims hold any water whatever.
Harry Broadman, do you concur with that assessment?
Not terribly. I mean, the question is, why were tariffs put on in the first place? It was a voluntary action, a policy call by the president and his advisors. And the question is, what have we gotten as a result of that? Have we gotten more open markets? No. Prices have gone up. Some of them have come down through the natural way the economy works. But, you know, as a policymaker, the supreme policymaker, which is Mr. Trump, you have to wonder what's the benefit cost calculation that he has made, that we're better off now, our industries are better off, our consumers, our workers are better off by this entire episode. And it's not clear to me that we are.
So we now have hundreds of thousands of businesses, big, small, and huge, in the U.S. that are either applying or are going to apply for refunds. Heidi Jo Castro met with some of the small business owners to see whether they're really expecting those refunds, how they're handling the process, and crucially, if they intend to pass any refunds on to their customers.
Each day, 500 kilograms of coffee beans sourced from around the world acquire their rich aroma here at Chesapeake Coffee Roasters in Crofton, Maryland, en route to becoming a delicious cup of coffee. General Manager Kevin Kihas has downed many a cup this past year while poring over the complications of President Trump's tariffs.
It was a decaf coffee that we paid 54 cents a pound extra on tariff.
The shelves of this warehouse tell the story. At various times during Trump's tariff war, coffee from Sumatra, Indonesia was tariffed at 32%, from Ethiopia at 10%, from Mexico at 25%, and from Brazil, the world's largest exporter of coffee beans, at 50%, which made it too expensive to keep in stock.
The total cost that we ended up paying on tariffs was about between $45,000 and $50,000.
So far, the federal government is on the hook to refund $35 billion in collected tariff revenue. In Chesapeake Roasters' case, the months-long process looks like this. The importers they buy from submit claims via the Customs and Border Protection refund portal. Those refunds are passed from the importer to Chesapeake Roaster. The roaster will pass them along as credits to the cafes they sell to. And as for the coffee drinker, there's almost no chance they'll ever see any money back. When President Trump introduced these Liberation Day tariffs, it was supposed to be helping Americans. Have they helped Americans?
I don't understand how they have.
In nearby Washington, the owners of Mary Pin are waiting for their importer to pass along the tariff refunds. The last year has put this crafting store under major money stress.
If we were ordering $500 worth of something, the fee for importing was also $500.
And prices for shoppers have gone up as a result. A study by Harvard University estimates that Trump's tariffs raised retail prices of imported goods by an average of about 7%, which amounts to an additional $1,000 to $2,000 paid by the average U.S. household over the last year. And like the coffee drinkers, those households will be the last to receive trickle-down tariff refunds, if any.
The economy here has been terrible, so we've definitely been struggling in general. So we don't have a plan right now to pass the money back, but we would like to reset prices back to, where they were before.
And that will be the long-term test of the impact of Trump's short-term tariffs. Will retail prices and the inflation they contribute to come down in the U.S.? Or will new tariffs simply replace them? Heidi Jo Castro, Al Jazeera, Washington.
So as Heidi just reported, tariffs cost American households on average $1,000 to $2,000 last year. With a small caveat, you heard at the beginning of this discussion, our guest Alan Tonelson disputing or putting in perspective, right, that estimate and those numbers. So you say we don't really know. Still, it appears, and there is a widely held view, that these tariffs have cost American consumers quite a bit of money. And so naturally, they have strong feelings. Alex Baird has the reactions on social media.
That latest court ruling has been stoking the social media machine. The ping pong between the president and the courts being seen by some as leading to just one loser. the American public. Donald Trump taking to Truth Social, disappointed that his picks for Supreme Court justices voted against his tariff policy, saying they've hurt the country badly, handing back money to those who have been ripping America off for years. The president labeling the decision by the court forcing refunds as
terrible, actually terrible, but it'll have no impact other than I hate to pay people back.
Tariff supporters saying the system was good for the country, creating a revenue system outside of taxes. And that is why the courts won't allow the program to exist. This exchange with the AI developed by Elon Musk and embedded into X, hammering home the concern for many Americans that despite there being refunds, none of that is actually going to consumers. That money will be going back into the corporate pocket. Grok saying that's correct, confirming the fear for many online. That anxiety doing the rounds in videos like these. The public waiting and waiting for financial relief. MAGA supporters being asked by the other side of the aisle, did you get your refund yet? Are you paying less for gas? And this Liberal commentator saying, we warned you.
So, Harry Broadman, Donald Trump, after the Supreme Court canceled most of his tariffs and said he didn't have proper authority to impose them in the first place, he wrote on his social media, quote, we shouldn't refund. The Supreme Court, he wrote, quote, the Supreme Court could have solved that situation with a tiny sentence. Any money paid by others to the United States does not have to be paid back. The Supreme Court had just found that the president did not have authority to levy taxes, $166 billion that the federal government took in without proper authority. It's unlawful. And he says we shouldn't have to pay it back. I mean, this is as much of a political question as it is an economic question, but how does that sit with you?
Well, it's also sort of a legal question. You know, companies are not compelled to pay back the tariffs that they collected.
Companies
that they paid. Yeah, right. The companies. Right? So the trail of money comes from, the foreign shores back into the companies, and then what do they do with that money? Does it go back into the Treasury or another pot, and then goes back to the consumers? And then you've got to line up and say, well, I bought 10 cups of coffee over 2 months, and you owe me, $4, whatever it is. Now, to get back that $4, obviously it's a hypothetical example, but there's a lot of activity in the background worrying about this. It should not have been done in the first place because I can't figure out where there's a positive benefit-cost ratio from the policy and how Mr. Trump was advised that this should go ahead and we'd all be better off. I think the answer to that is no. I don't think anybody that I know, economist or otherwise, would say we're now better off than we were because of this episode.
Well, I think you might be sitting next to one person who believes that tariffs are a good idea.
Here, please. First of all, there should have never been imposed tariffs on coffee and tropical products to begin with, obviously, because we don't make them here. There's no American coffee growing industry to speak of, et cetera. Those tariffs should have never been put in place. They were ridiculous. And there was big pass-through because there were no domestic substitutes.
Because you and I have spoken before when these tariffs were imposed. Yeah. And I remember that you told me tariffs are not a bad idea. They were widely panned, right? There was a widely held view by economists, tariffs are a bad idea. They will increase prices for U.S. consumers. You've just disputed that. But you're saying that, in your view, Trump shouldn't have imposed tariffs on products that can't be made in the U.S.?
On certainly tropical products, which will never be grown here because the climate's not suitable. But the second point is much more important, and that is, if you look at the U.S. domestic manufacturing sector, there has been a major turnaround during Trump 2.0 versus the final comparable Biden period. Whether you're talking about real manufacturing output, whether you're talking about capital spending for manufactured goods, whether you're talking about productivity, and even manufacturing job loss. The rate of manufacturing job loss has been cut in half. That's no coincidence. So it's not only due to tariffs, but that's no coincidence because tariffs have been so heavily concentrated in the manufacturing sector, and manufacturing is so heavily exposed to international trade.
So you're saying tariffs have, at least in part, protected American jobs and American manufacturing?
Promoted also. Promoted. Not only protected what exists, promoted new, especially when we're talking about real output. It's been a major turnaround.
The tariff is a really important example from one particular standpoint. It has undermined any policy credibility, frankly, of this administration. And we see it in spades and other things that the president is doing by dint of his personality. But we have to ask ourselves, close the books. We just had this episode. Are we better off now than we were before? And more importantly, what have policymakers learned from this?
You say it damages Trump's credibility based on what? Based on the fact that they couldn't pull it off, or based on the fact that you think it was the bad policy in the first place?
The latter. I mean, the fact that he couldn't pull it off was not surprising. I think he applied the tariffs under the wrong law. As a former trade negotiator, there are other statutes, and now we know that everybody in the world more or less has been educated about what statute to use. So the policy was inferior, and that's being polite.
So I have a question on that. We need to explain just briefly the legal aspect of this, which we haven't really touched on until now. I think that the foundation for understanding this is understanding that Congress, not the president in the U.S., has the power to impose taxes, and tariffs are considered as taxes. Therefore, it should be the Congress doing it, but Trump wants to do it. So he had to find a legal workaround, and he found the IEEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. Thank you very much. And then the Supreme Court ruled that actually they interpreted that wrongly, and he does not give him the authority to impose tariffs, hence the tariffs are gone, or at least those that were imposed under the IEEPA. But the moment the Supreme Court said that, here is how Donald Trump responded.
All of those tariffs remain. They all remain. I don't know if you know that or not. They all remain. We're still getting them. But other alternatives will now be used to replace the ones that the court incorrectly rejected.
Okay, so now the Trump administration is looking at the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, sections 232, sections 301, 122, and 138. Right. And they all give different legal basis for imposing tariffs, but different amounts of tariffs, different duration. Some of them have never actually been invoked by a president, and the first attempt to use one of those has actually failed. Section 122 gives president...
Hasn't failed yet. It's been struck down by the Court of International Trade, but that ruling has been stayed, and it's going to be appealed. So those tariffs are still on. They're not going anywhere yet.
But there were temporary tariffs to begin with, because that particular section allows for a maximum 15% of tariffs for 150 days. Again, the broad idea here is that Congress really should be doing this.
Congress makes the laws. They don't impose tariffs. They authorize the executive. And it's up to an executive to decide by his staff, by his U.S. trade representative, which statute should we anchor the policy that I want to put in place in. And I'll tell you, having been in these shoes before, that was a really poor choice of law.
So back to the fundamental question that you were asking. Should the trade, we explained the legal workarounds, and that's all being worked on. We'll see what happens. But should this policy be revived in the first place? Alan, you think Trump should go for big tariffs?
Absolutely, because we still live in a world, unfortunately, where most of our foreign trade competitors close their market in many varied ways to American goods for reasons that have nothing to do with market forces, whatever. And that situation, which has lasted way too long, shouldn't be allowed to persist 1 second longer than it needs to be. And in fact, it's very interesting, despite Harry's claim that Trump's lost all credibility, not a single foreign trade partner or trade competitor has walked away from the trade agreements that they've signed already, in part because they know that new tariffs are coming and they don't want to antagonize President Trump needlessly. And they've been very smart not to do that.
But that's an interesting reason to not want to intimidate or scare away the president, and then therefore will continue to do business with you.
There are two slightly different arguments here. One argument is, does this help the U.S.? And the other is the one that you're making right now, which is foreign countries may not want to run afoul of this president, which is slightly different. But that's slightly different because the U.S. is the largest economy in the world, and maybe some countries are calculating they can't afford to.
Remains the most important market by far for so many of the world's big and small economies, so many of which rely very heavily for exports for acceptable levels of growth and economic progress overall. And that leverage Donald Trump has been the first president to use that leverage in living memory. And it was a great decision.
We have only about 30 seconds left. Is there a positive tariff policy that could be or should be put in place in your view?
I'm not sure that imposing tariffs is the best way to do this. They're a way of negotiating trade deals, transactions, even going back to his phase one kind of program under his first term. Yes, we are the largest economy, and yes, we have great global standing, but I got to tell you, it's been eroded by this episode. And I think making a comeback is not going to be easy from my view.
I want to thank our guests today, Harry Broadman, former U.S. Assistant Trade Representative and Chief of Staff of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and Alan Tonelson, economist. Thank you so much to both of you for joining us in the studio. And that's all from the team here in Washington. For now, it's back to Heidi Jo Castro and Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha.
Thanks, Cyril. On the next episode of This is America, are we alone? We look at the president's decision to release never-before-seen files relating to UFOs. Is this a meaningful move toward government transparency, or one that leaves more questions than answers? That's Friday at 18:30 GMT or 2:30 p.m. Eastern here in the U.S. Goodbye for now.